Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here, and today I'm bringing you guys my What Battleship line should you be grinding or playing in 2021 video. This video has been made several times before, but of course with each year comes new changes and new lines and a shift in the meta, and we've gone through a whole just crazy series of changes this year with the commander rework, not just any theme mechanic reworks, but we've had several mechanics reworks from IFHE to shoot Deadeye being removed. Now we're getting submarines too as well. So it's about time this video gets an update. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to run through each line. Now, I'm not going to dive deep into each line. And they honestly need to be updated because, again, thank you, Commander Rework. I started to make guide videos for each line that go in detail with how the line plays, their mechanics, their armor layout, and such. And those videos will probably start back up again now that we've seen that they're kind of chilling out with messing with the commander skills. And I'll probably have to, of course, remake the three that I already made before this video came out. But what we're going to do is we're going to go through each line and focus on their big positives and their big negatives and talk briefly about how they currently play in the meta. That way you guys can make a decision on what line you want to either grind next or kind of hop on and maybe play as your main line for a little while. So let's go ahead and, oh, by the way, I'm going in the order that I grinded out the lines in. So they're not going in any order of these are the best, these are the worst. It's just the order that I grinded them in. So let's go ahead and get on into it. So starting, of course, with the U.S. battleships, we're, of course, going to talk about the main line and the split. So starting off with the main line, the U.S. BBs are a fantastic jack-of-all-trades class. They are, well, there's no particular range that they're better than one other at, except for, of course, extreme long range with the shell velocity of the American battleships. They have one of the slower shell velocities out of the battleship line, so they're pretty good at medium range, but if you're a good enough marksman at long range, you definitely can make them work. And the further back you are, I'm not saying to sit further back, but the further back you are, due to the shell arcs, you can get some fantastic plunging fire effects at around 20-ish kilometers. Not saying that they're terrible or anything at closer range, but once you really get that plunging fire effect going on, you can absolutely slap ships by going through their deck armor, of course, with the USBB shell arcs, and of course with the AP as well. The AP is very good on these ships. Now, from about tier 9 on up, they actually have pretty darn good armor. The North Carolina is notorious for being a ship that's quite easy to citadel, but after the North Carolina, the Iowa and the Montana citadels are nice and below the waterline, and they have a pretty good armor layout. Of course, they're not like insanely tanky or anything, but you're not going to be getting any surprise citadels from any weird angles, usually unless something really funky happens with the game. Also, from tier 7 up, they have that improved American heel, which unfortunately some premium ships that are quite old haven't gotten that added to their toolbox just yet. But from tier 7 plus, they get that wonderful American heel that originally was on just the Colorado because it was so slow and chunky down at tier 7. Now, speaking about the Colorado, from tier 3 to tier 7, the American battleships are in a dreadnought style, meaning they're slow, very well armored for their tier, and typically have a lot or large caliber guns. But that does get quite painful at around tier 7 with the Colorado, where most nations are getting access to fast battleships. You're stuck in a Colorado that only goes 20 knots at tier 7, but you do of course have 8 16-inch guns at tier 7, which are quite nice, and they're actually pretty accurate. They've done some fine-tuning to the Colorado since I grinded through her way back, 4 or 5 years ago whenever I started playing this game. So she's actually a pretty nice ship now, just a little slow for her tier. Now, they also still have good AA. Unfortunately, it's not the God tier AA that the American line used to have, but most certainly if you build into it, you will make carriers pay for striking you, but it's not to the level where I think building into it's really worth it. You're better off with a basic battleship tank build here for the Americans. Now, for the split line, the split line is a continuation of the Colorado. They are some extra thick ships. meaning that they're quite large, they're quite chunky. So if you do get hit with, shoot, any other battleship's AP, you are going to eat some pretty chunky damage. Now, the idea behind the split is that these are more sniper battleships. They're very slow, but they either have more guns than their mainline counterparts, or they have larger caliber guns than their mainline counterparts, but they are incredibly slow. The Vermont, for example, she's a big girl. She should be on screen right now. She makes the Montana look just like almost emaciated, really, with the bulk difference here. But she gets 12 457mm guns with that American AP, and these guns absolutely slap if they do connect on their target. But they are still, again, huge targets. They're very slow. They do have pretty good AA, and they get that improved hill too. But these are more for those of you that want to sit in the back and snipe, and they're pretty good in the current meta because the engagement ranges are pushed back so far. But I wouldn't necessarily say that they're better than the main line. The main line, especially the Montana, the tier 10, is still very much a very good battleship in today's World of Warships. She can sit back and snipe if you need her to, but with the velocity of the shells, that's hard, even with the Vermont as well. The Vermont doesn't have much better velocity than the Montana by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just that you've got bigger shells that hit a little bit harder than the Montana's 12 16-inch guns. So either choice, I would say, would be a pretty solid choice for the current meta, although I would encourage the main line over the split. The split is for if you really like sniping, and I don't. Plus, they're too slow, and you really got to stay in the back and be watching the way that the game's moving because you're stuck at 20 knots. So when something starts to go wrong, you have to get out. You can't stay and linger for a little while like you can with the Montana. So I would definitely recommend the American mainline over the secondary line. Speaking of secondaries, the Germans. Oh, the Germans, my favorite line of battleships. So right out the gate, these are probably not the best battleships to start on right now. Now, the game has had some steps to bring engagements a little bit closer. We have the improved secondary skills that we got, how long ago was that? 1 or 2 updates ago, to where secondaries are a lot better than they were after the Commander rework. Some lines that have been introduced are a lot more closer in, like the Dutch cruisers and the Italian battleships, so that's kind of encouraging players to get a little bit closer. But despite that, engagement ranges are still out pretty far, at least for usually the first half of the game. And unfortunately, the Germans just either can't get in the fight, or you can't really bide your time and then pounce in the latter half of the game as much as you used to be able to, because the game either sits out at those long ranges or they don't last long enough for you to have that second half of the game when you can really shine. But it still does happen, and the Germans can still get in there and mess some stuff up. So one of the primary features of the German battleship line are their secondaries. They have amazing secondaries for both range and accuracy, and they get the German HE pins, where when you get to tier 9 up, pretty much all of your secondaries can pin the major thresholds at those tier. And generally speaking, for the most part, the mainline German battleships, their secondaries can cross that threshold that they need to cross at their tier to be doing damage to a majority of ships at their tier. Now, sure, if you get up tiered, not so much, but at their tier they can hang in there without really needing IFHE. You can spec into IFHE if you want to, although I wouldn't really recommend it. Go see my German battleship video for that explanation there. But anyway, besides the secondaries, for the most part, too, the German battleships are typically up there in speed for their tier, especially from tier 7 on up. Well, even at tier 6 with the Bayern. The Bayern's quite nippy for a tier 6 battleship. Then you get the Gneisenau at tier 7, which is absolutely flying around at 34 knots with the speed flag. And then you get the Bismarck, which is 32, then 34 with the speed flag. And FDG and GK are... they're not drag races by any stretch of the imagination, but they certainly aren't slow for their tier. Both have a top speed of 32 knots, which is plenty enough to hang in there at their tier. Now, their armor is fantastic for close in. They got that German turtleback armor. That's where the Citadel is protected by additional armor that's angled to where you can get blasted at close range, but you won't get citadeled. Now, you're going to take a lot of damage, sure, but that damage is certainly better than Citadel damage, because Citadel damage can only regen a certain percentage of that, a much lower percentage than you can normal damage. So you'll get chunked at close range, but you'll be able to recover it. Now, that armor is twofold. You get chunked at close range, but it's not Citadel damage. However, at long range, you are a very chunky target because of the layout of the armor. So you don't really want to get shot at long range, which kind of sucks because, again, higher tier, a lot of the engagements are way out there, and the German battleships don't have the best range nor the best concealment either, especially considering if you want to get the full German BB experience, you have to build into the secondaries, and there goes any tanking or concealment skills there. Normally, you can mix it up a little bit, but if you want to go full secondaries like I enjoy, you got to give up a lot. Now, of course, like I said, you can build into certain aspects to improve that. Then once you get more comfortable with them, you can move those skills back over to the secondaries and then get that experience there. Now, they also get hydroacoustic search from tier 8 on up, which is a fantastic consumable to have on a battleship because, of course, you can have early warning for torpedoes. With how maneuverable a ship like the Bismarck is, having hydroacoustic search is great for avoiding those torps. Plus, the German BBs do not have the best torpedo protection at all. So that's a very useful tool that you need. Plus, of course, you can push DDs and smoke or ships that are hugging an island, hydro them and spot them for your team, or know where they're at if you're going to push them. Now, these are, of course, brawlers. These ships are brawlers through and through. You can't really, well, you can try and build them for longer range, but it's not really going to work. These are brawlers. They're fantastic brawlers. They're great close in. Their armor's great close in. From FDG on up, you've got a wraparound bow that is just a giant middle finger to anything, well, to everything except for the little slits near the nose where you can get through with like a Yamato or something like that. But they're fantastic ships at close range. I'm really sad that they're not more in meta right now. But if you're very experienced in them, you can still make them work. It's just very, very difficult to get to work right now. All right, moving on to the Japanese battleships. So the Japanese battleships, they typically have the biggest guns for their tier most of the time. They have, for generally speaking, for the line, pretty good armor for long range, especially when you start to get to the higher tier ships. Now, this is where that hesitation for talking about the armor comes in. A lot of the mid-tier Japanese battleships are actually battle cruisers. So their armor isn't really there, but they have a nice boost in speed and maneuverability, like the Congo, the tier 5 Japanese battleship or battle cruiser. She can go 32 knots at tier 5. That's fantastic, and she's quite maneuverable there too. But she doesn't really have the world's best armor scheme at tier 5, nor the thickest armor at tier 5. And that's a very, very, very just weird thing with the Japanese battleship line. Now, there are, well, pretty much everything the Japanese battleship line is actually real except for the Izumo, so you history buffs should enjoy this line. And who knows, maybe they'll make a proper Japanese battleship line and a battle cruiser line with the way they're going here with the splits recently. But that is the highlight of the line. You get a lot of fast-footed maneuverable ships at mid-tier. Now, high tier, once you get to tier 9 to the Izumo, boy, things slow down. And the Izumo is actually a lot better than it used to be. If you go watch some of my older videos, you're hearing me dogging on Izumo a lot, and people have been commenting recently like, well, why are you complaining about the Izumo? It's not like this. Well, because it was like that back in the day. Izumo used to be pure misery to grind through 3 years ago, but it is a lot better now. They've improved her AP pins, they've improved the accuracy of the ship, they've touched up her in several other ways too, so she's way better than she used to be. Now, the Japanese battleships also don't have the best AA. I mean, like the Yamato got an update a little while ago that added a couple more AA mounts to it, but it's definitely not an AA ship by any stretch of the imagination, nor is the entirety of the Japanese battleship line. Now, that armor that's great at long range is actually quite bad at close range, especially if you're the Yamato. The Yamato's got her cheek underneath her in between number 1 and number 2 turret that you can pin even when she's angled and Citadel the crap out of her because of her weird Citadel armor layout. But again, at longer range, it's actually quite good. But when you are forced to push in, you got to watch your cheek and watch your side, and well, you don't really want to be pushing in too hard in a Yamato or a Musashi or a Shikishima. Now the guns, those giant guns that they have at their tier, they're normally actually pretty accurate. They have the the Yami has the highest Sigma of any battleship at 2.1, so when you get there, the Sigma is quite good, but the dispersion, Japanese battleships are notorious for Japanese battleship dispersion, where sure you might get a good Sigma roll, but now your shells are flying all over the place because of dispersion. And that's of course a way to balance having 18.1 inch guns for the Yamato, where you can overmatch pretty much anything you see, unless of course it's got, wrap around bow like the Germans or the Soviets, but that's the price to pay for being able to punch crap in the face. And if you do get the unique upgrade for the Yamato, it definitely does tone it in a lot. The Yamato's unique upgrade is probably the only one I really recommend that you would spend your coal on right now because of how good it is. Now also the turrets, for the most part of the line too, have a very long 180 time. But of course, the Yamato takes the cake with like a 60+ second 180 time, depending upon what skills you take as well. But these are definitely in a very good spot right now, because even though you have battle cruisers and battleships in the mix, for the most part, these ships are mid to long range ships. And that's definitely where you want to be at right now in terms of the game's meta. So I'd highly recommend the Japanese battleships. And of course, the Yamato is a fantastic ship. It's actually, up until recently, was my most played ship in the game. It's a very good mid to long range ship. And plus, with the way you play her, you're sitting back at mid to long range for most of the match. And then late game, when your team needs to start to push, you can push in and you still got almost a full health Yamato there at the end. Fantastic ship. Can't recommend this line enough. Alright, then we got the French. So the French battleship line it's something alright. The designs are something for sure. So, the French have their troll baguette armor. They've got this, it's French armor. Your shells either overpin or smack their citadels. When you think you're going to get an overpin, you get a citadel hit. When you think you're going to get a citadel hit, the armor just eats it, either in the torpedo protection or you just get like a shatter, a bounce, or a pin that does nothing. No one knows what goes on with French armor. That's a joke, by the way. But anyway, besides having the French baguette armor, now, in all seriousness, the armor is 32 millimeters from tier 8 up, so of course you're going to get pinned by a lot of HE, and it is quite chunky, kind of like the Germans, but just because it's 32 millimeters absolutely everywhere. Now, they are very maneuverable. You get the speed boost once you get to higher tiers, which is fantastic on a battleship. It's wonderful to be able to reposition as fast as a French battleship can. And they're pretty good flankers when you can get into a flanking position and use that speed boost to get there and run up the side of your enemy and absolutely ruin their day. Now, Alsace 2 is a huge plus in the French battleship line. She's a tier 9 ship. She has 12 15-inch guns, and these guns, all throughout the line too, get French AP. French AP hits hard. It's high velocity, just smacking the crap out of your target AP. But the accuracy isn't quite there for most of the line because of normally having a pretty high amount of guns for their tier with those quad turrets. And the Alsace, they actually toned in her accuracy quite some time ago. It's a lot better than it used to be. It's a lot more usable than it used to be for sure back in the day. And the Republic, people love it or hate it. And that sums up my relationship with it too. I either have absolutely terrible games in the Republic or fantastic games. You get 8 17-inch guns with a proper build on them. You can get these guns down to a 20-second reload time base, which means with the layout of the armor, you can easily have a 17-second reload time on 17-inch guns with French AP. Now, they're not the most accurate guns, but again, with a 17-second reload time with adrenaline rush going on, you will be slinging a lot of shells downrange quite fast. And yes, their turrets are set up kind of like a super speed, so you get that going for you too. Also, the Republic was supposed to have a rotating funnel to keep the smoke out of the gun rangers' sights. That got lost. Wargaming, please add it in. Every time we talk about the Republic, I will mention that until you add it in. Also, the AA is quite good from tier 8 on up. Plus, with the volume of guns too, you can be quite fearsome with HE, especially with the Alsace, and with the fire rate on the Republic too. Although with 17-inch guns, you won't be needing to spam HE too much unless there's a really stubborn battleship that is just absolutely face tanking you. Then you can switch to HE and just ruin his day. Alright, moving on now to the British battleships. Speaking of HE, British battleships, of course, gets British BB HE, which has fantastic HE alpha and a fantastic fire rate all the way up and down the line, which means you're primarily firing HE with these ships rather than AP. Not saying you shouldn't be firing AP, but HE is your main source of ammo. Now, AP should be used when you get shown broadside because you have short fuse AP. You won't be getting a lot of citadels with this on heavily armored targets, but you will be getting a lot of pins. And on lighter armored targets like some light cruisers, you will just be slapping the crap out of them with that short fuse AP, or on some really light cruisers like the Colbert and the Smolensk, you can outright citadel them with your HE, which is quite good, of course, too. Now they also get the lull heal from tier 9 up, which you can simply just print a new ship if you need to, which is, of course, a fantastic ability to have. And they have good concealment as well. Now, the concealment isn't as good as it used to be. You used to be able to like legitimately get, I think, 11.3 kilometer concealment on the Conqueror, which is absolutely stupid. But now it's more along the lines of, I think, either 11.8 or 12 kilometers with a full concealment build on them. And these ships, they're pretty good for the current meta. One, because of the lull heal. There's a lot of HE now at higher tier, and the ability to just repair all of that fire damage is, of course, fantastic. The concealment's quite nice too, and the guns aren't the most accurate guns in the game, but with the British BBHE, who cares? You know, you're going to be setting a ton of fires. You don't need to specifically hit a part of their ship like you would be with AP. You just need to hit their ship to get your HE on target, and that HE will do the rest of the work for you too. This is honestly the easiest battleship line to rack up large amounts of damage in because of that HE. It's a great damage farmer line, but you do need to use your AP to really get the full effect there too. And they do have good AA, the Conqueror and Lion, and well, from about tier 8 on up, all their AAs like glorious 40mm Bofors, so you have fantastic long and medium range AA, but you don't have much when you get into close range at all. Alright, next up is the Soviet battleships. The Soviet battleships are, well, they're gods of bow tanking. From tier 9 up, you have full wraparound icebreaker bows. The tier 8 and even the tier 7 have partial icebreaker bows. So you angle correctly, you're going to be bouncing for days. The citadels are well armored too, as long as you stay angled. Now, that being said, their citadel's also exposed, so if something catches your citadel from broadside, from medium to close range, you're going to have a very bad day. A very, very, very bad day. Now, the guns are normally larger for their tier. They're not always the largest at their tier, but they tend to have the larger guns at their tier. Like the Kremlin, for example, she has 457mm guns, which is 18-inch guns, which is again on the large side at tier 10, but not the largest. That's kind of the trend for the line. Some of them have smaller guns depending upon their designs and such too. This line is, of course, mostly paper. I think from tier 4 up, it's actually all paper. So yeah, but anyway, they also have their quick cooldown time for their damage con, but they have a limited number of charges, so Superintendent's a must on these ships. Plus you get one less heal too, so you really need Superintendent if you're going to be playing a Soviet BB. Their AP is also quite crazy too. It's that Soviet AP, fantastic pins, fantastic velocity, and they get the Soviet dispersion gimmick the Soviet battleship dispersion gimmick, where the closer you are to the target, the better dispersion you have. 13 kilometers is where you can really start to notice this kick in, and once you get within like 8 kilometers, it's just a point and click adventure. Your shells are pretty much going to go where you aim, unless you get really screwed over by RNG, but I haven't really seen that happen before. The AA on these ships from tier 8 up is quite decent. The Kremlin actually has really good AA, but the AA mounts have no health. The devs decided back during the CV rework that CVs were only allowed to damage Kremlin, so they removed all the health from its AA mounts. Now, Kremlin itself, it is not the Kremlin you've probably heard about. It has received several nerfs over the past year. So it's not this monster that it was when it came out. It's still a pretty strong ship. It is by far the best tanker at tier 10. There's no doubt about that. but good luck hitting anything outside of 13 kilometers now with this ship. It's a really tough ship, but it's not the best damage dealer anymore. They've really have toned her down quite a lot in the past year. So the Soviet line, if you want a good tank, if you enjoy tanking for your team, this is the line to go down. But you won't be really leading your team to victory much with these ships. Now, the Sinop at tier 7 is very good. If you want to grind up just to the Sinop and then just kind of stop there, you'd be good. Sinop's amazing. But if you're part of a clan and need a really good tank for the competitive, like COTS or clan battles, sure, Kremlin's a good choice for that. The best choice for that too. Plus, it's got the 55mm deck armor, which is a wonderful middle finger to most HE in the game too, and that quick cooldown time on its damage cons is great as well, but I wouldn't really recommend it otherwise. Alright, lastly, the newest battleship line, the Italian battleships. So the Italian battleships are very unique because they get SAP, they get semi-armor piercing ammunition, which means against lightly armored targets, you will be slapping the living crap out of them. It doesn't overpin at all. I don't think I've seen a SAP shell overpin except for like on DDs, and still then, most of them pin. But it's quite good for dealing with lightly armored targets. They have better SAP alpha than they do AP alpha. And their AP is actually pretty darn good too. It's that Italian high-velocity AP. If you play the Roma, you know what I'm talking about. And it hits like a frickin' truck when there's something broadside to you. Now, the thing is, unless you can guarantee you're going to Citadel them, it is just better off using SAP because of this SAP damage alpha. So, there's that. And they typically have smaller caliber guns for their tier, but starting from tier 9 up, they have a high volume of guns, with Christopher Colombo having 16 15-inch guns. Now, yes, 15-inch guns are small, but they do have SAP, meaning that you're throwing 16 SAP shells at the target. You're probably going to be chunking them pretty darn good. Even without Deadeye, the accuracy is definitely workable on the Colombo just because you're throwing 16 shells at the enemy. And if half of them hit, you're doing like 15, 20k easily to like a battleship if you hit their superstructure, or to some cruisers too, like the American cruisers. SAP just screws the American cruisers over so hard if you manage to get most of them to connect. Now, like I said, they don't have the best accuracy, and this is true from pretty much the entirety of the line. And plus, SAP is only really good from about tier 8 on up, because from tier 7 down, you still run into a lot of Dreadnought-style battleships that simply have too much armor for SAP to penetrate, so you're getting a lot of shatters and such using SAP. Plus, there's no HE on this line, too, except for the secondary, so when you get a ship that bows into you, like a battleship, and they're just bow tanking you, SAP really isn't that great there unless you can manage to get it all to hit on the superstructure, which is going to be really rough to do with a bow in profile and the accuracy of the Italian guns. Plus, at higher tiers, they pay for the volume of guns, like I said, and accuracy, but also reload too. Even with the reload module on like the Colombo, you're still sitting at a 33-second reload time. And the range isn't that great either. Colombo has an 18-kilometer maximum range without the range module built in. Now, they do get a fighter and a spotter plane too, so you can take the spotter plane and extend that out a little bit, but even then it's short by tier 10 standards. But the armor is actually pretty good from tier 8 on up. If you've played the Roma, you should be familiar with that armor scheme. It's pretty much that, but larger for the tier 8 and the tier 9. And then for the tier 10, it's got this weird like turtleback, but it's only 20 millimeters, so it's not that great, but it's still turtleback, so you got that going for you. And the ships are actually pretty maneuverable, especially the higher tier ones. And they get the exhaust smoke generator, meaning that they can emit a smoke screen as they're moving at full speed, which is great for disengaging or sneaking up on a target. You'd be surprised how many people won't notice a giant smoke cloud rushing them at 35 knots until it's too late. And they also have short range AA. It's decent AA, but it only goes out to 4.8 kilometers, so yeah. Now, as far as playing the Italian line in 2021, it's workable thanks to the smoke screen generator. The ability to just go undetected and run away from the target at whim with the smoke generator is fantastic. And like I said too, it's great for sneaking up on ships. But when you're not in battle, meaning like the engagement is happening outside of your range, it's really, really boring. and you can't really get within range because 18-kilometer range, and sure, Spada can get out a little bit further, and if you equip the range model like the Colombo, now you've got a 36-second reload time, which sucks. So it's pretty painful when you're not engaging, but when you are in the right situation, they are quite strong ships. But I wouldn't really recommend grinding up to these guys just yet. I mean, sure, take it for a spin, but the Colombo is really just kind of a mad boat for me right now. Like, yes, the sap is great, but getting it to work and getting in the right position takes a lot of luck, a lot of skill, and a lot of time too. And higher tier matches, they just don't last as long as they used to. So I wouldn't really recommend them right now. So guys, that's my what battleship should you be playing in 2021 guide. I know we only really touched the surface on a lot of these ships, but I just want to get their highlights, get their downsides, and move on as quickly as we could. So this wouldn't be like an hour and a half long video. But let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Let me know what you guys are playing in. What you guys are playing in 2021 in terms of battleships and how you're playing it. Hope you're having a wonderful day. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. We're already at 30,000 subs, and I cannot thank you guys enough for that. Again, hope you're having a wonderful day. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.